Yes, I am very close because I want you to know how much I appreciate you being here. It means the absolute world to me that you are interested in seeing my painting style and just to get a glimpse of what I do and my process. So thank you for being here. Okay, so now that we have the mushy stuff out of the way, we are gonna jump right into doing a Chenoa kit, which is about 12 to 18 months old in size. Mom and I are a little bit on the fence about the gender. I totally see boy. Mom is not really sure, but maybe you can jump in and let us know what you think in the comments. So if you wanna see a little bit of the process, stay tuned. Thanks again for being here. Today I am working on shading the limbs, but first we need to create a mother color for shading. Shading adds dimension and realism, otherwise the sculpt can look a little flat and not lifelike, right? So first I need to mix this neutral brown for the shading. And I've already covered the base in a neutral brown about 3 or 4 times just to give me a solid base so the shading or the shadows, which is what really gives us our realism, can pop. So I am using the primary method, but in our case precisely, I'm using crimson red, yellow ochre, and phthalo blue to give me the brown that I'm looking for. I feel pretty confident in the direction that we're going with this color, so I can mix in the white thinning medium that you see. And here we are with the color that I want for shading. So to get more movability in my paint, I've added thinning oil just to give me the right consistency for shading. All right, so our base is ready. Let's get started with our limbs. So I focus on the natural creases like the wrists and the elbows and the joints of the fingers, making sure to get all into the details of the sculpt. So then I go in with a sponge to soften the edges. This keeps the shading from looking too harsh, and it also helps to blend it into the skin tone. One key in shading is you want subtlety, but depth. And in order to do that, blending will give you the best result. So make sure you take your time here. But if you're like me, you can get a little too happy sometimes. All it takes is just using your sponge to make sure you remove the extra paint. But blending is going to be your friend. And we'll repeat the same process with the right arm. And you may have noticed, but you don't really need a lot of paint. Less is more when it comes to shading. Shading is definitely a repetitive process, so you want to make sure that you are taking your time. This is not about a race. This is a slow and steady process. I promise you, in the end, you'll be more satisfied with the outcome. So between each and every layer that you apply paint and then blend out, you want to bake. So while the arms are baking, we're going to move on over to the legs. Here we're going to start with the deeper creases. And we want to make sure that whenever we are focusing on the creases, that we keep in mind the end result. Whenever it comes to creases, and of course with the shading and the shadows, you don't want your creases to be a lot harsher or more pronounced than the actual shading itself, because then it starts to look odd or just out of place and just unrealistic. So if you're like me and you like to paint into your creases as you shade, then you want to make sure you keep in mind the outcome or your inspiration. And hopefully you are using Google Images or even a picture of someone you may know as your inspiration, because that's how you're going to determine your skin tone and your shading. Now, the placement of your shading can vary from doll to doll depending on the sculpture's details or your inspiration. But the most important thing to decide whenever you are shading is, where does the light fall naturally? Where are the shadows naturally? And that will always help be your best guide in where to place your shadows. So I make sure to clean the creases, because if you allow the creases to build up with paint through all the different layers of shading, cracking can happen, peeling can happen, or it can just start to look muddy. So you want to make sure that you are taking your time with every single layer and cleaning out those creases, because of course we want it to look nice, sharp, and as realistic as possible whenever we're done with the shading process. Blending with the cosmetic wedge is just the best way to ensure that you are transferring your shadow into your light area, just to give you the most realistic appearance. And you may be wondering, how many layers of shading should I do? That's a very good question, but the only thing that can determine that is your inspiration. What does your inspiration say? Whenever you look at the skin tone that you've chosen in comparison to the actual shaded or shadow areas of your inspiration, what does that suggest? Because that's what you're going to want to follow. And the best way to do that is using a grayscale, turning a picture or your inspiration into a black and white image, and then using the values of the lighter areas and the darker areas to determine how many layers you should actually do. So keep in mind that in order for our values to increase, we'll need another shading color that's a bit darker than our first color here. So we'll apply a few layers in this color, and then we'll get into the next shading color in our next video. But in the meantime, if you found this helpful, feel free to like the video or leave a comment. I always appreciate hearing from you guys. It really does keep me going.
You better turn up. You better be there when I shake. Watch me rockin' if I can't stop.